Okay, I'm going to get started. So welcome everybody. If you missed the first intro, I'm Ruth Thomas, Industry Principal here at Curo, and I'll be taking you through this webinar today. At Curo, we run regular webinars covering best practice in compensation, and also sometimes we have sessions that focus on how our compensation management solutions can support you with the reward challenges that you face today. But today's session is a best practice webinar, and we're going to be focusing on real-time reward and whether it should have a place in our reward strategies today. And by real-time reward, I mean, I guess, a bit like the ad hoc or off-cycle rewards that we have used in the past. Do we need to move to a more frequent way of awarding pay to our employees? So in terms of the agenda, this is what I'm proposing to run through. I'll start with housekeepings and introductions, just a brief introduction to Curo, and then I'm going to move on to consider the current state of play. So what's going on that would lead us to potentially think about bringing in real-time reward as an option. I wanted to take a brief moment to sort of have a look at the psychological debate that's going on around reward at the moment. Just a brief look. That's actually a topic for a whole webinar on its own. Of course, real-time reward or ad hoc rewards are nothing new. We have had them before, and I'm sure some of you may be using them in your own organisations. But I thought it was worth a look back at sort of what actually happened to ad hoc. Why did a lot of us abandon that approach? And then look at how we might use real-time reward today. So I'm going to put forward, some suggestions, share with you some practice that I've seen amongst our client base or with other companies that I consult with. And also happy to hear from you in terms of any suggestions that you might have in terms of how you are using real-time reward or thinking about using real-time reward in your organization. So from a housekeeping perspective, you're currently all on mute. As the session's quite short, we like to stick to 30 minutes. We'll keep questions to the end. And when we get to that point, I'll ask you to use the chat box in the Join Me panel for you to submit your questions. And then I'll address those. If you don't want to ask your question in the forum here, then please, do get in touch afterwards. We'll share the contact details. I'll always get back to people after the session. We normally get a few people that will email in after, so we can carry on the conversation. And this session is being recorded. And we will post that to our YouTube channel, and we'll share the link with that. So everybody who's attended the call, we will share the link with, and then also a PDF copy of the deck, so that if you want to refer back to what I've talked about today, you can. So just a quick intro to Curo for those of you who don't know who we are. So we're a compensation management technology provider. We've got a number of solutions that help leading companies to drive their business and talent outcomes. We're a point solution, so we're not part of a broader HCM suite, but we are a compensation specialist, and many of our clients choose to integrate our platform into their existing HRIS or HCM platforms. And, we work with many people because they choose to work with us because of the expertise that we embed in our products, and because we take compensation very seriously. And here's just a few examples of some of the clients with whom we work, the leading companies with who we provide services to. And if you'd like to find out any more about those companies or about our product portfolio, then you can obviously go to our website at curocomp.com or get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to share any information with you. Okay, so on to today's topic. Real-time reward. Well, I think we're all coming to terms with the fact that the new business landscape in which we're operating is very agile. And most of us are trying to look at how we can keep up with the pace and rate of change that's impacting both our business internally and externally. And obviously in HR, we're having to do this too. And many of us, I know, are rethinking our traditional approaches to various HR practices. And I think what's really questionable is how relevant in this environment annual people management events are. And some HR processes have already sort of gone the way of real-time. Employee engagement surveys, they always used to be a once-a-year event. And now, supported by new technologies using apps and devices, some companies are moving, to an ongoing basis of capturing employee feedback, to capture emotions and sort of continually assess employee engagement in the real time. And the same has been happening really in succession planning. That's gone real time too. So you can now get, through technology, continuous insight into the quality of leadership and your leadership bench, so that as an organization, you can respond to movement in key positions quickly, rather than it being a once a year snapshot in terms of succession planning. In reward, we've all followed this breakdown of the performance management, or the criticism about the annual performance review that's been sort of bubbling around now probably for 3 years. We know many employers are moving to ongoing approaches to managing performance, and it's really that area that has led some of us to question whether we should be doing the same thing with reward. I know, when I first started looking at this change in performance management, it was immediately what I thought to myself is, how are we going to manage reward? Is that going to follow suit? And that's mainly because, obviously, of that historical link between performance and pay that we've had around probably, since the 1970s, when performance-related pay first arrived on our scene. So, we really have to question, as I said earlier, whether annual has a place in an agile world. It's a bit like New Year's resolutions. How many of us actually keep our resolutions for a whole year? It is hard to maintain relevance when so many factors can change. So I think, there probably is a case for us to consider real-time reward, particularly when you look at this question: is the annual merit process broken? So I'm talking about fixed pay here. And, there are a lot of people saying, the process is broken. And this is due to the challenges we have around weak employee engagement, low labor productivity, high unemployment, which is leading to, talent scarcity. And obviously, from a reward perspective, this issue of restrained wage growth. For the last 10 years, we've pretty had, stagnant wage inflation, and, at various times, both in the UK and the US, negative real-time wage growth, which has made, managing annual pay budgets quite a challenge when it comes to trying to do anything other than manage cost of living. So we are kind of in this holding pattern. This holding pattern isn't moving anywhere fast. And I don't think we're going to see a change immediately in annual merit budgets. So maybe we do need to think about a new approach. And maybe we've been asking merit, to work too hard. I put up here a few reasons of, why you might be using that 2 to 3% merit pot in your own organisations. Obviously, we've got, the traditional pay for performance approach, paying for in-year performance. We've got more and more people thinking about using that pay budget to pay for talent, so rather than pay for performance. So they're looking at how they can buy in the required skills they need in the organisation. They're thinking about retaining future talent that they might need for the next business year or two, and then also fighting off market threats, so going out to the market, to buy in specific talent or retain specific talent. And for all of us, we cannot ignore the fact that pay equity is becoming increasingly important. And so I know from working with some of our clients during their annual reviews, they are looking at, setting aside portions of that budget, that merit budget, to address pay equity issues. And again, with the limited budget, that's challenging. And of course, some kind of cost of living. Is it acceptable that employees get a zero increase year over year, especially when we have this issue of negative real wage growth? But in an agile world, I guess what I'm questioning here is how many of these reasons that we look to pay people or award people or recognize people actually happen on an annual event. And for me, probably it's only the cost of living nowadays. that really works for. And I'm seeing that managers want to be able to benchmark their employees on an ongoing basis, not just once a year. They want to be able to allocate awards when the effort takes place or when there's a competitive threat. And they want to be more in line with project, team, and skills-based approaches to working, which are slightly different than our traditional ways of working. So if we're questioning whether the annual pay review is broken, let's look at the psychological debate that's emerging about whether actually pay is a motivator at all. Should we move to real-time reward, or should we be considering intrinsic reward, for example? So I'm sure you're aware there is this whole school of thought that actually money is not a motivator; it's a dissatisfier. Dan Pink, who we've all heard of, I'm sure, he talks at length about this. Tammy Erickson, similarly, she talks about meaning being the new money, and how other drivers are more important to employees in today's work environment, and that employee expectations have changed. And of course, we've heard a lot about millennials. In theory, millennials are intrinsically motivated rather than extrinsically motivated. In Deloitte's millennial study in 2015, their survey evidence saw that the primary motivation for millennials isn't directly related to money, and that 50% of millennials would be willing to take a pay cut to secure a job that aligns with their values and ambitions. Now, I'm not sure, for me, there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here. Is all of that dissatisfaction about money because of the low wage growth that we've had? And I know definitely, we've seen this rise in interest in the whole reward and recognition sphere, looking at non-cash rewards, and many people have deployed reward and recognition programs with some success, in order to try and find ways of motivating and engaging employees beyond the pay packet. But for me, I'm not sure really anyone says they don't care about their base pay. And I am a strong believer in this motivation crowding theory. And that's quite an old theory, but it's looking at saying that, you need to get the money right. You need to get the extrinsic rewards right first, before you get the intrinsic factors right. And if you don't get the extrinsic bit, if you don't get the money bit right, then any attempt you have at non-cash reward will just be crowded out. The noise will be too great around that. And as we're talking about real time, then I thought it was also worth considering, from the sort of theory of reward and psychology, Pavlov's dogs, we always think about is, the power of instant rewards to reinforce instant feedback. So like any reward or feedback, compensation works best as a motivator when it comes as soon as possible after the desired behavior. So maybe, we do need to think about instant rewards as a way of being able to increase employee engagement and achievement. So seems to be that, there is a good argument for potentially considering real time, but this is nothing new, as I said, at the top of this session. And I'm sure many of you are probably still using real-time, ad hoc, off-cycle. I'm using all those terms interchangeably. In the US, obviously anniversary-based reviews, more people have moved towards focal reviews. And, I've definitely seen in the last 5 years this trend of moving to more quarterly, half-yearly or annual reviews. And there are some key reasons for that. Why did ad hoc fail, or why have we moved away from that traditional ad hoc approach to compensation? Well, the first, most obvious one is around, cost and budget control. Many of these ad hoc changes that were going on were happening under the radar. We weren't necessarily counting the cost of those changes. And found ourselves sometimes in that leaky bucket scenario, that when we had to, especially, some awkward scenarios where we had to explain the total wage bill increase annually that didn't reconcile with, what we'd originally said was the targeted adjustment that we were looking for in that year. And of course, there's that difficult debate about how to manage budget for ad hoc. Do you deduct all the budget at the beginning of the review before you allocate your merit budget. So you tell managers you've already spent this much this year, therefore you have this much left to spend. Do you manage a holdback that you can use throughout the year? So, there was a lot of people were struggling with how to manage cost control around ad hoc. And of course, there was this issue around the general lack of governance with one-time adjustments. And it was very difficult to handle those equitably across all employees. And they also tended to undermine many pay-for-performance plans or, the intent of some of your other compensation principles, because often those one-time awards were managed out of context. And then, of course, there was just the administrative burden that was a reason why some people moved away from this. They didn't want to have to run this business process monthly. So what's interesting there, though, if you look at those reasons that I've just been through, is that none of those are actually employee-centric reasons. There weren't reasons that it didn't work for employees. It was more reasons why it didn't work for us, the people managing the process. And the same as other areas of HR that I talked about earlier on, compensation technology is also evolving to help us with these problems, and I'll come on to mention that briefly at the end of this session. So if we were to think about using real-time reward, how should we use it today? So I'm just putting forward some suggestions. This is practice that I've seen, practices that I've heard or read about or seen research on. And also, as I said, I'm interested to hear anything that you might have been doing in your organizations. So let's start with talent retention. Pretty much, the traditional way of managing ad hoc, this might be in response to a bid away situation or a market threat. And that still, tends to be one of the most common reasons why we would give someone a pay raise change out of the normal annual biannual cycle. Pay equity, as I mentioned earlier, is becoming more and more important for us. And I know, people are making one-off adjustments as they look at the issues of wage gaps, gender pay gaps in their organization. And, some examples of good practice are also when any new hire joins. We know the situation at the moment is that to move jobs, you're more likely to get a bigger pay increase, and bringing new hires into your organization can bring about internal, lack of internal equity. And so, quite often, not only do you, bring a new hire in, but you look at the impact of that new hire salary on the pay equity of your existing employee groups. Exceptional contribution or behavior or performance. This is really like the old style spot awards we used, as a recognition tactic. I think, these are still worth considering. The surprise element has a significant multiplying effect. I still remember, an example with my husband's company where he was working an extreme amount of overtime. He works in IT, and he was given £200 dinner voucher and said he had to take his wife out to dinner in order to placate her. And I do, even to this day, and this probably happened about 8 years ago, remember that the impact of that and the feeling of going out for dinner and knowing someone else has paid the bill, even though, that £200 was quite a small amount compared to the amount of overtime my husband was probably earning at the time. So, you can never underestimate the surprise effect of those one-off awards for exceptional contribution. Internal realignment, again, this is, we quite often use this. Someone changes role during the year, or there's been a reorganization, and then that's a time when we may want to consider re-benchmarking employees' pay. Completion of project team skills, now that's slightly new, and that's really looking more at the way that work is evolving. I'm a big believer that skill-based pay is going to become increasingly important as we see jobs unbundled into skill or activity sets, undertaken by lots of different types of employees, diverse employees like gig workers or project-based workers. So, we want to be able to have the flexibility to be able to reward those individuals at the time that those projects or teams form or dissolve, or if you're talking about skills-based pay, when employees, acquire a new skill that you need within the organization. And that's a slightly different approach. And I think that's where real-time reward is going to be very relevant in the future. I put on here referral reward award. I heard about a company sort of doing this the other day. We typically think of referral awards as something that we give employees for recruitment or for the recruitment scenario, when they recommend new employees to the organization. But it can be used to recognize other things that bring benefit to the company, like new business leads, for example, new partnerships or new opportunities. It's a sort of paid for ideas scheme, I suppose. And it's interesting to think about, whether that is something that will be relevant in our organizations today. So just some examples of, how you might use real time. I've seen other examples. If we look at incentive pay, where companies have been using a bonus points system, so that as each time a person is having some form of continuous assessment, feedback, or any of these events happen, they can be awarded a certain number of bonus points, and those bonus points accumulate throughout the year and then are used to help determine the year-end bonus. So it's an interesting, concept again of sort of managing awarding pay throughout the year, more real. So if we're going to think about these approaches, how are we going to make real-time work? Well, I think there are some key things you need to get right. The first is, how are you going to budget to control these costs? In the same way we said earlier about annual cycles breaking down, annual budgets are almost always obsolete before they've even taken effect. I know we spend that time, normally September, October, November, doing our budgets for employees. And then by the time the new financial year starts, something else has changed and they are pretty much irrelevant. So we need to think about a more agile way of managing pay budgets allocation during the year. Maybe we set quarterly amounts that can be flexed in response to business demands or changes in talent requirements during the year. And then maybe have some true up at the end of the year. I don't know, but it's just thinking of a way of being able to manage that in a more agile manner. We need to think about how we're going to manage equity and fairness, again, critical in today's environment, especially when not everyone may get an award under this approach. If you move to a wholly real-time award approach, how are you going to deal with those employees that have been overlooked, and how are you going to continue to make sure that you've got internal peer relativity? So I think you need to think about how you're going to support managers in that, how you're going to provide information to them about being able to maintain fairness in the decisions that they're making when they're making them on an ongoing basis. And when we talk about managers and communication, pay transparency is obviously critical. And you're going to think about how you're going to train your managers to know when a real-time reward is appropriate, and stop them from, what we always feared was them gaming the system. I think it's a good idea to make them aware of what their peers are rewarding. So maybe, you keep everybody informed of who's allocated how many awards, for example, during the year. So that allows them to self-regulate, because if they see that they're continually giving off-cycle awards, it may start to them to question, well, is that really relevant, or am I in line with, the general trend in the business? And, also making sure that they have all the information they need to communicate the rationale of any real-time rewards and ensure fairness for employees. And definitely, it isn't a case of one size fits all. I think real-time reward will be more appropriate for some organizations than others, and also for some talent groups rather than others. So I think you need to think about, where it's relevant in your organization and adapt in response to that. So I mentioned I was going to quickly talk about how technology can help. And, there are compensation management solutions that are evolving now to support this process. So traditionally, like our own product here at Curo, we've managed what we call bulk reviews, which is a sort of a group of employees going through a review for a fixed period of time. But now, technology is available to help you manage those budget issues annually, so you can track budget spend throughout the year, and managers can see, for example, how much they've spent of their budget already during the year. They've got the capacity to look at their employees' data year round, and especially looking at real-time benchmarking and employee data. So if someone walks into my office tomorrow as a manager, and threatens to resign, as a manager, I've got the capacity to go on, see how they're benchmarked both internally and externally, and make a decision about whether I need to address that retention issue. I also think, as I said earlier, if we're going to maintain pay equity and governance in line with our compensation principles, then you need to provide that decision support to managers so that they can understand the impact of the decisions they're making, and show them the pay transparency. So who's got what changes throughout the year. That should be easy to see, because it's often easy, as a manager, to forget who you've paid what to when it's been done on an off-cycle basis. And some solutions are even sort of considering predictive capability here. So if you spent this much of budget, for example, so far this year, and you carry on awarding at the rate you're doing, this is where you might expect to see your merit budget spend by the end of the year. And then obviously, there are the various predictive models that are around looking at retention risk, and they can obviously help in this scenario as well in terms of planning real-time rewards. So comp tech is definitely evolving. We've been addressing this here at Curo. We are releasing at the end of this month, September, and the next couple of weeks, our rolling review approach that will allow managers to have access to the platform year round, and they'll be able to go in, they'll be able to make ad hoc or real-time recommendations, and they'll be able to see the history of all their employees and who's had what during the year. And in the same way we do with the rest of our platform, they'll be able to access decision support through BI and reports, so they can track key trends during the year. Okay, so how are we going to fund this then? We talked at the beginning about the pressure, the squeeze on merit budgets, and how how we're struggling to have real impact with those budgets. So if we start talking about how moving to ad hoc, where's the money going to come from to fund this? Well, for me, the frustrating thing about this is that if you're talking about 3% of your company's payroll, that's actually not a small number. And payroll is frequently one of the most significant expenditures, particularly in some industries like the service sector. It is actually the largest cost, with many organisations targeting payroll expenses between about 15 and 30% of their gross revenue. So if we're going to manage reward strategically, and our salary budgets are going to remain at the rate that we're currently, have had for probably the last 8 years, then we really need to find a way to leverage the return on investment that we're getting out of this significant expenditure. I have a big problem with how we tend to set merit budget. And I know this is a slight generalization, because I know we take into account our own company's affordability and market positioning, but too often it is a bit like a sheep-like approach, as in well, the market's paying 3%, well, they're paying 3%, well, we're paying 3%, and so are we paying 3%. So it just tends to be we're looking at that, everyone's paying 3%, and that's the approach we're going to go to. And then you take it to the next stage when we go out and we communicate to all of our managers and our employees that the pay budget is 3%. And then we try and differentiate between our best talent and our less good talent. And so we push this through a merit matrix, and our high performers get something like 5 to 7%. And generally, how do they feel about that? Well, often what we're seeing, and it's been cited in lots of employee surveys, is that the amount they're getting is not enough for them to feel recognised in terms of their overall contribution. And then you take our lower performers. Well, we're giving them 0 to 1%, and how do they feel? They don't feel that great either. I mean, in reality, who actually ever admits that they're a low performer? If I could ask you all to raise your hands on the call, who of you think you're a low performer? No one really admits that, do they? So, seeing yourself get a very low increase, you're not really going to justify that against your performance. So I guess I'm just going to sort of finish up by saying, maybe it's time for a more radical approach in terms of how we set the amount of money that we're going to put aside or allocate to manage talent during the year. So rather than that flock-like approach, maybe we should think about the budget that's required to invest in the talent that we need to drive our businesses forward and to drive business performance. And therefore, we will start considering salary increase budgets as a strategic investment tool instead. And I was over in the US last week at Pay Factors conference. Pay Factors is one of our partners, CompCom, and I was lucky enough to see Jason Averbuch speak there. And he's a big advocate of non-monetary reward. But I think this particular quote he talked about last week when we heard him speak was, skip the peanut butter, pass the jelly. Don't rely on a peanut butter spread solution such as merit increase across the board. Instead, what's important is that you know your employees and you think about what they respond to and what they would like to see. And that, again, is not across all employees. It's looking at your talent groups within your organization. So to close, a few reward principles. Some of these I've shared before, but I think, they're always worth a revisit when we think about what we're doing in terms of our day-to-day policies. It's making sure that we make rational reward decisions that are consistent with the type of company we are and the types of markets within which you operate, because you will need different responses to different markets. And as well as that, as looking at the different types of talent in your organization. And then after what we've talked about today, go away and have a think about whether real-time reward is appropriate for some of the pockets of talent within your organization. We always obviously need to maintain the fact that costs of pay are consistent with business performance. And in today's environment, we can't get away from making sure that reward decisions are fair and equitable. And that whatever we do, we communicate with employees, because we know this issue of fairness is much more important to employees than absolute amount. And so when it comes to engagement, they care more about whether they've been paid fairly rather than the actual amount that they've been paid. So at that point, I'm going to open the floor. We've got just a couple of minutes if people want to stay on to ask questions. As I said at the beginning, you're all on mute. If you want to ask me a question, then please type into the chat box and I will answer those. If you don't want to do that now, that's fine. You can get in touch with us through the following contact details. We will, the session's being recorded, and we will send out to all of you that attended the link to the recording on our YouTube channel and also a PDF version of this deck. Okay, so I've got one question that's come in saying, I've worked in lots of different industries in HR. What did you personally find work best with employee motivation and reward? Well, I think more recently, it's definitely been looking at talent. The best tactic I've seen more recently is talent segmentation. So looking at looking at the different types of talent you need in your own organization rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, which is what we've traditionally adopted. And particularly in quite fast-moving companies in the tech sector, they've acknowledged that potentially, pay bands, pay ranges are not appropriate, and they are for certain roles, having to just market price. So I know it's hard, and if you're a large organization, thinking for different groups of talent can be complex. But again, I think having the technology around now to support you with lots of different approaches to pay is where that is getting a lot easier. And we're supporting companies with multiple approaches to pay for their different talent groups, and that's made easy through our platform. Okay, any other questions? Anybody else like to put something through now? Or as I said, do get in touch with us, and happy to keep the conversation going. So does Curo offer that on a different level? As a big company, it's hard to keep track. I'm not sure whether that question is saying, does our technology offer that, or do we do that within our company? I don't know if you just want to clarify that point. Oh, right. Yes. Yep. So we do that. So one of the benefits of our point solution is that the flexibility that we have and the ability to support different populations, and people will use our platform specifically for that reason. So we have a lot more flexibility than some of the integrated talent suite solutions. So we will be supporting multiple populations, and that's particularly if you take a look at our client role, and we've got a lot of legal firms on there because they have lots of different approaches of managing the different types of talent in that organization. Okay, so there's a question come in from David. Hi, David. How can we undertake real-time benchmarking across a multinational company when we don't have a grading framework? Well, I mean, you can still benchmark jobs even if you don't have a grading framework. Obviously, that needs to be done on an individual basis, which is a challenge. I mean, this is the area that I think we're going to see the most development if you look forward for the next 5 years. I talked about skills work earlier, skills-based work, and if you think about how we manage benchmarking today, it is all around job, and we still mainly manage people in jobs and benchmark jobs to the market. And I think that is going to have to shift if we start to think about a more dynamic workplace where you're going to have people deploying skills through gig platforms or through other types of platforms, and you're going to want to pay for a specific piece of work rather than someone in a whole job. And I've tried to get my head around this. I've tried to get my head around individually benchmarking people and benchmarking for skills. And the only hypothesis I can work with is that this advancing AI technology that helps us to manage multiple data points will somehow facilitate that for us, it will not, and we'll be using very powerful algorithms to do that market benchmarking. Okay, well, I'm going to close the floor there because we're nearly out of time. But thanks all for joining today. If you want to see any of our other events that are happening, then you can see that on Curo Comp underneath our events portal. And any questions, just get in touch. And we look forward to seeing you again on one of our webinars soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.